Hey guys, welcome to the second video in this series. In this video, I'll be talking about my method for studying and for taking the exams. And this has certainly been the most requested video ever since I put up the first one. And I would certainly say that it's one of the most important, if not the most important things that you can do for the MCAT. And that is knowing the best technique that works for you to pinpoint your weaknesses and improve your scores. So I want to first start off by saying that you need to find an isolated place to study without distractions. And for me, when I was preparing for the MCAT, I was initially planning on taking it in January. This was a big part of why I had to push my exam back from January to March. I didn't really have that isolation and it wasn't exactly conducive to my studying. But on the other hand, when I postponed my exam and classes started back up again, I was at my apartment and I could study in my space in my apartment, and also I had a friend who would give me his office space to study as well. And that was really conducive to learning for me because his office space had whiteboards and everyone else was working too, so there was kind of that peer pressure to be working and making progress. This was a common question that I had. How did you study each chapter? What was your method? And I just want to start off by saying I didn't read anything, any of the review books cover to cover. I never even read the chapters completely. I tried that at first, but that just wasn't working for me. And you know, everyone has different study methods, so I'm going to go through and discuss the things that worked and didn't work for me, and this was one of them that didn't work. And in the beginning, I would go through and highlight through these review books, and I would try to take notes, but that was just way too slow. And even highlighting was also taking up a lot of time. Another technique that I tried was that I would go through the exam, see a weak concept, and if I didn't know what it meant, then I would just look it up, and then I would just watch videos on it or look it up in the book and start writing out I would start writing out notes on it. And I also found that that wasn't the most productive way for me to study either, because first of all, while I wrote down the notes, obviously I was learning and everything, but it was taking super long. And also it was very difficult to organize the notes. The fact is that everyone who's really getting ready to study for the MCAT is starting from somewhere. No one is going into it with zero background in chemistry and zero background in biology, and that's why I think it's unnecessary and kind of inefficient to study entire chapters. It's better to use those books as a reference to pinpoint your weaknesses. And later on in the video, I'll talk more specifically about how I did that in a systematic way to see results. So instead of starting off by reading books cover to cover and building that content, I kind of already had my content built because I did have a strong background. I did make all A's in those sort of MCAT prereq classes. And I would do a practice exam one day, and then the next day I would review it. And that's how it would kind of alternate. And so on the day that I would have the practice exam, I would set aside that about 8 hours. Obviously the MCAT's a little bit shorter than that, but I would set aside about 8 hours to take the exam, and then the next day I would review it until I could get through the whole exam and review every single question. And that could have taken anywhere between 10 to 15 hours if you follow the technique that I'm going to explain. And when I took whenever I studied, I always made sure that I gave myself breaks. Whether it was taking those breaks during the practice exams, using those to the fullest extent to refresh my brain, and after doing the exams, I would also make a point to wind down and recharge my brain. Even when I was having those long study days where I was studying maybe 10 to 15 hours in one day, I would still take a break to eat and not be studying while I'm eating. And then even after I was done, I would just make sure that I could wind down without thinking about the exam, because already after studying for that long, your brain is kind of fried. I think it's really important that while you're studying, you should have a support system and have a group of friends that can kind of help you get through the exam. And I think it should be a diverse group of friends. It's good to have people who are going to take the exam at the same time as you, have people who have already taken the MCAT, and they can also kind of guide you and support you with their experiences. And have people who aren't even pre-med and don't even have to deal with this struggle so that they can kind of help you get your mind off of things. Whenever I actually took these practice exams, I mimicked them as best as I could. And I really took it to the next level. Like, I called the test exam that I was going to test at and asked them for their screen dimensions. I asked them like what temperature their room would be at. So whenever I would take a practice exam, I set it at that temperature. And I tried to start the exam at the exact same time that they would start it on actual test day, so that I could just kind of get that circadian rhythm going, I guess. And I would take those breaks at with the exact timings, and I would do in those breaks whatever I would actually do for the real exam. So that would be going to the restroom, drinking a whole bottle of water, eating food, and I would eat the exact same food that I planned to eat. And this was like part of my experience when I was studying, was also I was like fine-tuning what foods would be best for me for the exam, in terms of preparation and like logistically eating it and things like that. And I would do jumping jacks, just to sort of get the blood flowing, get my mind off of the section that I had just finished, and move on to the next one. And also, this is something that I didn't account for when I was practicing, because I actually didn't realize it until after I took my last practice exam. But I never accounted for time for them to take my handprint, because on test day they will take your handprint during your breaks every time you leave and every time you entered. So I didn't really practice for that. It obviously didn't like hurt me too badly that I didn't do that, but it's just something that I'll do my part in reminding you. I said this in the last video, but I'm going to say it again, and I cannot emphasize this enough. The AAMC materials are the best thing that you can have to prepare for the exam. There are some third-party materials that I used and third-party practice questions that I used, but no matter what I used, none of them were as accurate as the actual AAMC exams and their questions and things like that. Now, I would say when you review your exam, be patient and really make an honest attempt to understand why you missed every single question. This is an absolute must to see improvement, and for you not only to learn the concepts, but also learn how to take this test. The AAMC is definitely the best resource for questions, but their explanations will literally be something along the lines of, the answer is C because C is the best answer. With the exception of cars, they do a good job of explaining why the others are wrong and why the correct answer is correct. But third-party companies and their practice tests are actually better about explaining the answers more thoroughly. But that doesn't mean abandon the AAMC resources by any means. What I used to do was I copied the question stem from AAMC whenever I felt that the explanation was subpar, and I pasted it into a search engine, and usually I would find among the first few results a thread from Reddit or from SDN, and odds are that someone will have asked the same questions or would have been confused about the same topic as you have, and you'll get answers from real students who have also gone through the MCAT. Now, the thing about these platforms is it's really important not to be intimidated by them and to take it with a grain of salt. For example, with Reddit, you can see people's scores right next to their names, or right next to their usernames. Like, a lot of times people will put their scores and their score breakdown. Don't be intimidated by that, because those are real students and they have also been in the same shoes as you, and I have also been in the same shoes as you, and don't let that get to you. Just try to follow their logic and just avoid any toxicity that might be on those platforms. Try to mimic the exams the best that you can, and by that I mean use the AAMC questions, but obviously the AAMC only provides 3 full lengths and 1 unscored sample test. So you only have so many official tests to go by with the AAMC. But one thing that I did was that I tried to sort of make practice exams through the AAMC questions on my own. So even though you couldn't really highlight or strike through on anything besides the full lengths, I still tried to maybe make groups of 50 to 60 questions from, say, the chemistry question pack, and then 50 to 60 questions from the cars question pack, and just try to make it so that I would have 4 sets, ideally from different subjects, but it was okay. Like, it wasn't the end of the world if I did like chemistry and physics, or like 2 biology question packs, because there's not enough for you to be able to make it so that you can have all 4 of the sections every single time. You might have to double up on a section, but the idea is to build that stamina and try to do it under time conditions and just get used to the exam. Now I'm just going to dive into the actual method for pinpointing my weaknesses and actually improving my score. I would definitely say that what I'm about to say from here on out is kind of the meat of the video. So the way that I would start off by doing it is I would review every single question, even if I got it right, because I could have got it right because of a guess or because I had a flawed logic but somehow still ended up with the right answer. So it's really important to go over every single question, even if it's correct. And then from there, if I ever saw any question, any concept in the question that was unfamiliar to me and that I know that I should have known from my readings or from my review class or anything, but it just wasn't solid, I would look up that concept in my Kaplan books, and I would find it, I would use the book as a reference and find that one topic, and then from there I would kind of see and read up on other topics that were in that same section related to that one topic, and I would see other topics that were weak for me and just read up on those and add those to my list and improve from there. And sometimes through this method, there could have been like 2 or 3 topics just from the question itself that I identified, and then I made sure to thoroughly follow through with discovering every other interconnected topic from the Kaplan books related to this first topic. I didn't take notes on it or anything, I just kind of read it in the Kaplan books and highlighted it. Sometimes if it were something like a pathway or an equation or something more complicated, I kind of had a whiteboard handy where I would just draw it out so that I can get used to seeing things visually, but I never had a set of notes per se that I kept track of my weaknesses with and that I consulted regularly to try to improve. Now, over time, I built up this list. With that said, I'm going to show you more specifically what I did in terms of making a spreadsheet and what that spreadsheet looks like. So this right here is my sort of study sheet where I would keep track of concepts that I missed, concepts that were weak, concepts that I found in my reading, as I was referencing the topics that I didn't really know, and then I found additional concepts that were weak for me. And as you can see from here, I made 1 page for each sort of major topic on the MCAT, so a page for physics, a page for general chemistry, organic chemistry, biochemistry, biology, psychology, and sociology. Now, for each of these pages, I have divided them by the chapters in the Kaplan books. Now, if you like Princeton better, then you can divide them by the Princeton chapters. I just found it helpful that if I divided them by chapters, I could pinpoint my weaknesses from each chapter as opposed to just having to read every single chapter. For example, I didn't have to waste time reading the nervous system chapter. I'm a neuroscience major. My background in the nervous system is already pretty strong. But then if you look at the endocrine system chapter, there were a lot of weaknesses here, and I could have spent more time targeting those weaknesses. So let's take a look at how I use this spreadsheet and how I target my weaknesses and also practice them. So let's just open the chapter about the digestive system. And as you can see here in this column, I have the actual topic that was weak. And then here, this chapter name just fills in automatically. And then here, I keep track of where the source is in terms of what question I found it from. I've found it helpful for me to start keeping track of the question that I got the tool from, the question that I got this concept from, so that I could learn not only the concept itself, but also how to apply it if it were thrown at me in a question. Now here with these columns, I tracked how I practiced the concepts. So basically, my idea was that I should be able to explain this concept back to myself or be able to draw out a pathway or a reaction or whatever 3 times correctly in a row. And I kept track of that with these 2 columns. So for example, if I'm going over this topic and it says attempts left 3, total attempts 0. So say that I go over this topic and I have never gone over it before, so that's why it says total attempts 0. Now let's say that I come to this topic and I'm able to explain it to myself correctly. So then I say that I only have 2 attempts left to try to explain it to myself, and I've given it 1 attempt. Now, say on this one, on carbohydrate digestion, I've already tried to explain it to myself once, but I didn't do it well, so I have 3 attempts left. Now, let's say that I'm not able to explain this concept to myself. Then I leave the 3 attempts left alone, and then I give myself 2 for total attempts, because that means that I've tried 2 times to try to explain it to myself, but I haven't been able to do it 3 times in a row, so I start over from 3. Now let's say that on a different day, I'm going over the same list again, and I'm back on this one. And on the second day that I'm doing this, I am not able to explain to myself what this means. So then that means that I can't explain it to myself correctly 3 times in a row, so I put this 3 back, and then I say that I've given it a total of 2 attempts. And that's how I keep track of it. And then once I say that I have 0 attempts left, that's how I can consider that I've mastered the topic, and then here I mark it as a Y. That way, when I'm doing the review and looking at this list as a whole, I can just turn on a filter and just look at only the topics that I haven't yet mastered. Now, let's say that I'm going over full length 2 in biochem, and I'm looking at question 29. So I have that pulled up right here. Now, say that I didn't really know a lot about how blood flows to the liver. That's basically what this question is about. It's about blood flow from the small intestine, and where would that go? So say that I didn't know that, and so I start looking up things about the liver and trying to find out the answer to this. And in my reading, one of the first topics that I come across that I didn't know before was the hepatic portal vein. And then I marked that the source for this question was right here in question 29 in full length 2. And then I give myself 3 attempts left, and then I give myself a total of 3 attempts to try to do this correctly. And I haven't tried to explain to myself yet, so I say 0 total attempts. And then from that reading, I find more and more concepts related to the liver and more concepts related to the previous concepts that I'm reading, and I just kind of follow that branch and just keep going until I'm sort of covering all my bases and until I can't really find any more interrelated concept that doesn't tie to this topic anymore. This is really helpful not only in just patching up your weaknesses, but also in helping your brain figure out how the different topics on the MCAT are interconnected. And a lot of times you're going to have to know how to make these connections on the MCAT. So if you can naturally program your brain to do it this way when you're studying, then that'll be really helpful for you in the long run. Make sure that when you review this, you only want to do this 1 time a day, because you really want to make sure that you know this topic in the long run, and you want to ensure that you're not just memorizing something and just repeating it 3 times in a single day, and then you think you've mastered it, but really you just knew it short term. After adding all of these topics, I'm going to turn on my filter and go back to the top of this list for this chapter. And now I'm going to go down the list and say chyme, and then make the appropriate changes if I can explain chyme to myself, and then pyloric gland, and then see if I can explain it, and then make the appropriate changes here, and just keep going down the whole list, so that now your knowledge about the digestive system is a lot more interconnected, and it's not just isolated things about the liver and isolated things about the stomach. Now, I mentioned that when I was in the office space studying, there was a whiteboard there, and I found that to be really helpful. And also I said that I didn't actually take notes. But what I did instead was, if there was ever a concept such as that I could have written out visually, such as
a pathway, a reaction, or even an equation, then I just use the whiteboard so that I could see it. But if it's something that's more like vocabulary oriented, you'll find that a lot of psychology and sociology terminology, these are basically vocabulary, like definitions. So things like that you can just kind of do sitting around if you don't have a whiteboard to like draw out something more complicated. But if you, and you can even do this like passively if you're just waiting in a lobby somewhere or something like that. But for some of these, like especially like these biochemistry, like pathways and things like that, like glycolysis and gluconeogenesis, you really want to be able to draw those out. So just being able to draw it out on a whiteboard in one color, and then using a different color marker to make corrections or mark any imprecisions in what you've written or whatever you couldn't remember, you can kind of visualize where you're lacking. Now, see, sometimes you're not going to get it right on the first try. And if you look at this section, I did fermentation a total of 6 times before I made sure that I really mastered it and wasn't missing a thing in that topic. So you really have to have a lot of patience, and look at how long this this little section is, this chapter. So even if I just was just adding this one topic at the end, I made sure that I went back to the beginning and then went through at least once in that day if I were adding something to that section. And like I said, if I were just sitting around, then I would just try to go through all of these sections and at least try to explain to myself as many topics as I could, especially if they didn't need to be written out. So that was my method for systematically keeping track of my weaknesses, and also making sure that I'm not wasting time going over things that I already know, which is why it's important to mark it when you actually master a concept. And that basically sums it up. I found that using this spreadsheet was the most important tool for my MCAT success, and I just really seized any moment that I could to study this, either passively or more actively with a whiteboard where I was writing as many visual things out as I could.
Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you found it helpful, and if you did, let me know with a thumbs up and a comment down below. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments as well. I'll try to answer them directly in the comments, and I do plan on making a Q&A video, so your question might be featured there as well. If you missed the first video, I'll have it linked right here so that you can watch it, and be sure to leave comments so that I know what to make my next videos about.